welcome back to Share Truth Apply Scripture. I'm Jordan Shambly, joined by Cedra Sarton and Hannah Harrison. If you listened to last segment, we are continuing our discussion from last week on sexual abuse in the church and how to handle that, how to set up safeguards, how to be aware of situations. It's a very heavy topic to talk about.
Very much so.
And it's the kind of thing that really makes you, it can foster a lot of fear. But I think just before we go into how to combat these situations, that's what this segment's about. I just want to say again that we need to understand that this is not primarily, and this is going to be counterintuitive, this is not primarily about us.
Yeah.
This is primarily about the character of God, his reputation before the world, and how we handle his name. As the church, we are his representatives in human form. While Christ himself is before the throne, we are down here. We're representing God, and how we handle sin and how we handle sinners, especially within the walls of the church, says a lot about who we believe God is and how seriously the world should take him. So this is something to take very seriously and frame it in that perspective. That's not primarily about us and how we feel in our pain. It's primarily about the holiness of God. So that being said, let's go into how we can do better in setting up environments where these kinds of things don't happen. And Hannah, you've provided us lots of really, really good notes. And already before the show, I'm just going to say, I've been like zoning in on the notes, and these two are talking to me, and I can't hear a thing because I'm just like reading all this information. So I'm going to really try to pay attention again and not be distracted by all this great information. So, Hannah, why don't you go into this? Tell us, like, maybe where do we begin?
Okay. Well, first of all, since you mentioned my notes, I will say, for those of you listening and for also Jordan and Cedra, Caring Well is a new, they've done a report the Southern Baptist Convention has, is where a lot of these statistics and everything came from. They've also given a lot background and how to help and everything. So a lot of this comes from them. It's not from me.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure comes from the Lord to them. So,
yeah.
It's all from God. But anyway, it is very important that we step up our game, I believe, and try to combat this in the church and also, out in the world just to protect our children.
Right.
But especially in the church, the Caring Well, they had a lot of good information and a lot of good tips. We mentioned before that a lot of people know they're abusers. I think I've said that every segment. It's so important because we don't really think about it like that. Yeah. And so that makes it even more important for our churches and our ministry teams, our pastoral teams, to step up and pick the right people. And so through that, I think there needs to be a process. They also do as well. And when they come in for interviews, you want to interview, you want to sit down, you want to know where their heart is.
Right.
And you want to make sure, because as we mentioned earlier, it's easy to say, I'm fine, I'm great, my walk with the Lord is woohoo, great, everything's fine. But that's not often always the case. And so when you sit down and you have these hard conversations and you start asking them, well, what's your past with children? Well, if you're going to be a children's minister, why aren't you doing that now? What can you list? Give me some references. Can you go back? Because in a lot of these situations, pastors will jump around or they'll leave church. Maybe it's a youth minister, whatever the case, and if it's not reported, well, the new church doesn't know it, and you just don't know the ripple effect. And so it's so important that you interview and that you ask hard questions when you are interviewing a potential new member of a leadership team.
Yeah.
But also on the other side of that, the church needs to have a team prepared. I think there are so many different issues that come up with sexual abuse. And if it didn't happen in the church, if someone were to come maybe visiting and said, hey, this is a problem, this is something that's happened to me, you need to have both men and women. Yeah. Women I think are important too, because a lot of the time it is girls. It's boys too. It's both. But you need to have someone that they're going to be comfortable talking to.
Yeah.
And that are equipped with this kind of past and know what to say. Know not only, and I'm all for Christian counseling and all of that, but you also have to keep in mind the physical and the mental stuff that is going on and what these people are trying to just to just deal with, you know, and we need to be prepared to have that. And, you know, we mentioned earlier how people say, oh, well, maybe they cast the blame on the victim. You know, even if that's in somebody's mind, they need to have somebody ready to sit it to maybe get it checked out, maybe think, okay, this is a professional. Yeah, let's see what their opinions are.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very key potential part of the well-being of a child or a girl or a boy or adult even, you know, that has gone through this process. And our churches, a lot of the times they're in your congregations, you know, that have had the psychology degrees. They've been in that field. And a lot of the times I know in my church, my mom has that background. And she's been called in on multiple occasions just to sit down and talk. And I think our churches really are in need of that.
That's such a good point too. You were about to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it's good to know, like I said, that goes back to really knowing the people in your church and building relationships and knowing who has this sort of background.
Right.
Knowing the people in your congregation that maybe have medical backgrounds of all kinds, people like that, and then utilizing that. And be like, would you be willing to be on a team? Would you be willing to come in and talk to people when we have situations, you know, things like that.
Well, that's really good too, because and I especially like what you said, like talking about there's that ministerial side of helping these people, but there's also the physical and mental needs, and it does kind of bother me sometimes where the church and Christians tend to separate those two things, like one is spiritual and then these are just kind of like, and some take it to the extreme. Well, they'll pray for someone to the exclusion of actually caring for their physical need. I think Christ himself talks about that. Maybe it's Paul. Either way, it's God writing the scriptures, saying like, I mean, how can we tell someone who's hungry, oh, go be filled, and not give them something to eat?
Right.
So we need to understand too that the physical and mental needs are as spiritual as the soul needs of the person. And having in our church, in the church I go to, there are a couple of doctors, of physicians there, and they've been called on many times if a kid fell and hurt themselves.
You know who those people are.
Yeah, they're called in immediately. So having those, knowing who can help, who's equipped to do that, and not just relying on, oh, well, this church is a spiritual place, let's just kind of say a prayer and maybe you report back to me in a couple of months, see if things are going well. Actually help these people or connect them with someone who can. That's such a good
and
good
even
point.
Spiritually, I think that we're called, we have these desires to do, I'm here. I think the Lord led me to AFA.
Yeah.
You never know. Maybe the Lord put you in that church for that reason.
Right, yeah.
So step up and use your gifts that the Lord has given you is kind of...
Yeah.
And that way you're using your spiritual gifts and you're helping them kind of minister to them. But both ways,
and being equipped for those people too that you said would walk in. Maybe they're not from your church. Maybe they weren't abused in your church. Maybe it didn't happen there. But they come in with that problem. I know you can be as secure in your own congregation and trust everyone that will never happen. But then somebody comes in from across town,
right?
And you there's really no excuse to not be prepared.
There's not.
Yeah. And I like that in going and making this team. I see that you have like education and grooming down, which I think is very important. Taking time for, not just for the team, but for the entire church, educating them on situations and teaching them how to look for the signs and things like that, and teaching them who to go to. Okay, these people are set aside for that. Go report it to one of these people.
Right. Yeah.
And that's also reporting. Education, I think is very essential in a lot of things. There's a lot of bad things that happen in the world. Human trafficking is another one, and when we look for these things, we see the things that are out of place. But it comes back to us being aware. When I know something, I'm more inclined to sit here and listen to it. If you're talking about Star Trek. I don't know anything about Star Trek. I don't know why that's the first thing that came to my mind. But I'm just kind of going to be like, yeah, okay. But when you're talking about this and you know the background, you're going to be more inclined to, not saying that you're not inclined to protect these children anyway, but you want the best for them, and you're going to be on guard. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're judging them either.
Right, exactly.
It means you're looking out and you're aware of the situation.
Yeah, that's good. And continuing down your list of notes, I mean, there's so much here. And when someone comes to you, we talked a little bit about people putting people in positions of authority, and a lot of churches just kind of do that. I don't want to say carelessly, but it kind of is carelessly, where it's like, oh, this person's a good person. I know this he's a cousin of so and so. He's really good at this thing. Let's put him. He's the minister of this thing now.
Right.
And it's just sort of like this haphazard kind of like, you want to be nice, you want to have an open and inviting environment, and so you're just like, oh, you're good at this thing. God's gifted you in this way. You go minister to our congregation this way. When you look at the Bible, that's not what happened. No. There was extensive prayer about it. Like before, Paul would set someone up as a pastor of a church that he planted. He would pray about it. When they set up the deacons, Stephen and the deacons. There was a lot of prayer, and God revealed to the people who should have been the deacons. Right. And the deacons, they weren't in this position of great teaching authority. They weren't writing epistles. They were setting tables. They were helping the widows. They were doing some very hands-on stuff. So no role in the church is too small for very intense prayer about. And so when we're looking at who should be in charge of Sunday school and who should be in charge of the children, there should be intense, extensive prayer, but also, who is this person? Are they qualified?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, regardless of whether or not they're going to hurt someone, are they even qualified to teach? Does their life match their what they claim to be a Christian?
Yeah.
But you say there's some several practical things here too.
Yeah. I like what you have here, which are just, it seem like such small things, but open doors, no sexual jokes, respect privacy, things like that. Having your written appointments and things like that, I think just create this environment where things like assault and stuff, there's no room for it.
Yeah.
It can't
happen.
You can't happen.
But I mean, like, there's no place for that to take root and grow.
Exactly.
Because you just go ahead and decide that there's no place for it. So if you just practice these things like the open doors thing, it's like with working here, it's one thing I've always respected with when I have to work, when I have to go into like I sit down in someone's office and talk to them. The doors are open,
right?
And if for some reason there has to be a closed door conversation, they're always going to have other people come in and sit in on it.
Or there's that window kind of.
We have windows.
You can see what's happening.
Yeah. So like that's kind of like something here that we try not to let. We try not to foster any kind of behavior that could possibly lead to that. So if you just go ahead and settle in, like, these are the rules, this is how we're going to do things,
right?
Then you can't. There's no room for it anymore.
No.
And just to end this segment in this episode, I hope you realize there are things that you can do, even as a member of the congregation. You can go to your pastors and talk about this. There are things that you can do to set up an environment where this can't happen, like we've been saying.
Right. And also on that, I mentioned that a lot of this material came from the Caring Well. The Southern Baptist J.D. Greer has set up a 12-week program. Wow. It's a video program. There's a handbook to go through with the ministerial team in mind, pastors, for them to go through this process and to learn. So I recommend checking that out if you're interested. Yeah, we can put a link in. But definitely check into that.
Absolutely. So feel empowered to do this, to take these steps. It's not because you distrust people, but it's because you're honest about sin and you really care about the character of God. So thank you for listening to this episode. We'll see you next week.